Hello and welcome to the Center for LGBTQ and Gender Studies here at Pacific School of Religion. My name is Bernie Schlager. I use he, they pronouns, and I serve as Executive Director of CLGS here at Pacific School of Religion. Our topic for the fifth and final workshop in our Queering the 2024 Vote workshop series is entitled Finding Common Ground, and we have Dr. Leonard McMahon, a professor at Pacific School of Religion and founder of Common Ground Dialogue, for this workshop. And we will be exploring more specifically living together in this post-election world. Just a few housekeeping notes before I continue my introduction, if I might. This event is being recorded for later posting on our socials, and it is also being live streamed now on our Facebook pages. We will not record, nor will we post any chat feature. So again, welcome to CLGS. In today's workshop, again, PSR professor and founder of Common Ground Dialogue, Professor Leonard McMahon, offers the CLGS Queering the Vote workshop on living together in our post-election world. Some questions we'll consider today with Professor McMahon include the following. How might we live together in a nation that is so often marked by sharp political disagreement? As we look to 2025, how might we, in the words of Common Ground Dialogue, bring divergent citizens into deeper conversation for the sake of our democracy? In what ways might we queer our post-election communities and move beyond the binaries of us versus them, winners versus losers, the enfranchised versus the other? And very importantly, how might we support one another in our work of creating more justice, hope, love, and compassion in our world today? And just a very brief bio of Professor McMahon. Professor McMahon holds a doctorate in theology at the Graduate Theological Union here in Berkeley, works in the areas of spirituality, theology, and political theory. In addition, Professor McMahon holds an MA in Religious Studies from UC Santa Barbara and an MDiv from Harvard Divinity School. So welcome to all of you, and welcome to you, Professor McMahon. We're honored to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Professor Schlager. Thank you very much for the invitation. I am so grateful to be here with you and CLGS. I'm so honored by the work that you do and to be a part of it. It's just remarkable. I want to welcome everyone who has gathered here today, and thank you so much for taking the time out of what I am no doubt sure is a busy schedule. So thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to a conversation with you. Yeah, just I suppose as a formal way of introduction, my name is Leonard McMahon, as was mentioned, and also my official title is Assistant Professor of Pastoral Care, Spirituality, and Political Theology at Pacific School of Religion. And there is such a thing as political theology, and we're going to get into that a little bit today. So allow me to set up, to go ahead and begin sharing the screen, but let me just make sure it is where it needs to be, and I think it is. Okay, one moment here. All right. Okay. Okay, are you able to see everything that I am seeing here, or is it, okay, it's just the slideshow. That's what I thought. Okay, great, fantastic. Alrighty, so today's topic is living together in our post-election world, and I added the subtitle of By Cultivating Democratic Dispositions, what I call democratic dispositions, and we're going to get into what that means in just a moment. But let's start where we have to start, which is in the recent weeks, we've experienced something, for most of us gathered here, I imagine we've experienced something that we might call apocalyptic. We might call this to be an apocalyptic moment. It was an apocalyptic election. By the way, as we go through, I invite anyone to offer a question or a comment as we go through. I want to kind of queer a presentation process. in which, of course, I'll present, but also welcome questions, welcome interruptions, welcome creativity in this process. So one question I have is, does anyone know, of course, the Greek for apocalypse is revelation, right? Apocalypse is Greek for revelation. So, and does anyone know the reference again from the biblical texts, perhaps, to why it's called Revelation? Why it's the book of Apocalypse is also called the Book of Revelation? What is the reference there in the biblical text? Why is it referred to as a revelation necessarily? This is a question that's pondered biblical scholars for a long time, but I welcome any thoughts on that if you have them, particularly in the chat. But mainly, for our purposes, it means that the differences are now revealed, right? It's very clear what is happening in our country right now. This election was unmistakable in what it revealed about our society and about the nature of our democracy. So it leaves us with a choice and a chance. We really have an option here to take the opportunity that's presented by the revelation of what's there in our society and see what we can do with it. The question, of course, is how to go about doing that. And we have a chance. The thing about Revelation is that it is not the end time. It simply reveals the end of what was once an illusion. So the reference is that in the biblical text, it's the end of the Roman Empire, right? It's what's anticipated in the text to reveal what God's will is for the world. So what we have here is the end of the illusion that our society was chugging along just fine. Everything was okay. Even though there were problems, we could handle them and so on and so forth. No, we've reached pretty much a point where we can no longer ignore the issues that are present in our country. But we should also know that nothing is inevitable. It doesn't mean that we are stuck with anything that has been revealed, right? Revelation reveals an opportunity. So Martin Luther King Jr., in a letter from his Birmingham City Jail, mentions that time is neutral. In fact, time is neutral, right? He's commenting upon the remark by most of his peers, his white ministry peers, who seem to think that that progress will happen inevitably, right? Social progress, racial progress will just occur. Black people in that moment didn't need to protest as he was leading them to do. It was going to happen regardless, but he responds by saying that time is neutral. But also later on, and also in his other works, he mentions that the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice. So how in the world can time be neutral if it's supposed to bend towards justice? If there's a moral arc that bends towards justice, seems to be contradictory. But the second phrase about the moral arc of the universe is a reference to, it's not that time is inevitable or progress is inevitable or justice is inevitable. It's that people are inevitable. So here he's pulling from Augustine, who makes the claim early in Christian history that coming out of his Manichaean background, he recovers from being a Manichaean, these were folks who believed that there was a war between good and evil, and you had to choose the right side, you had to discern and choose the right side, and that was a whole metaphysics to that. But no, instead he comes out of that and he offers the insight that creation is good, the world is good. The problem is that human beings are so woefully ignorant of the goodness that as we go through our lives, we live out the desire for God in ways that doesn't satisfy. So we seek the satisfaction of God, but we'll never reach it through these other ways other than God. And so we spend a whole lifetime, and of course, Augustine spent much of his Confessions talking about his failings to pursue or find God in the ways he was doing it until he came to the place of faith. So where we've arrived now is a place of faith, right? That's what's inevitable. That's what brings justice. It is human beings desiring God, desiring goodness in life. That part can be cultivated and crafted towards justice. And that part is what he celebrates. And I want to celebrate that as well. But we have this instrument called time. And so the question becomes, what do we do with it? It is neutral on its face. So this apocalypse that we're in, this end times, it feels like the end times, the end of the delusion or the illusion that we've been living in, and the revelation of what's really going on, what's really there, feels incredible. It feels unbelievable. It feels untenable. It feels like we might not make it. But we have seen this before, and we've seen more than this before. And all of our communities on the margins, I speak from the African American community predominantly, but I'm also queer, so I speak from that community as well. But from all our communities, we've seen difficult times before, and we've made it through. So we do have tradition, we do have guidance, we do have inspiration from those who have come before us. We do have those words, we have those videos, we have those songs and art, and we have all of that stuff with us. But we also have something else unique to our moment, I believe. And I think it's also what makes this moment so painful and so difficult. It's something called the Tocqueville effect. Alexis de Tocqueville was a philosopher in the 19th century, French nobleman who came over to the United States in the 1830s, 1834 and 35, kind of wandered around the United States for a while, and then wrote and published his thoughts on his journeys. And he published in 1835 as well as 1840 in Democracy in America, the 2 volumes. And these 2 massive volumes, 2 wonderful volumes on an outsider's critique of the United States. But one of the things he noticed was there is within American culture the belief in equality such that, so strongly that any sign of inequality raises expectations for more equality. So he comes up with the phrase that you probably heard before: our appetite grows by what it feeds on, right? Our desire for equality grows by what it feeds on. So in this moment, we have encountered post-civil rights, post, various movements, queer revolution, we post-velvet revolution, post all these other things. We've experienced this heightened sense of democracy and inequality and the possibilities that are present in our moment. And they came to a crashing thud with this election. It was so decisive and it was so heart-wrenching for so many who could see the other side. You could see the possibilities. It looked real. But that is part of the pain of rising expectations. It comes with the experience that's a little different from those who came before us, who could imagine the future that we imagine as well, but who couldn't really perceive its possibility. So here we are in this moment with these, the pain of these rising expectations. And one of the ways this is also described is the revolution of rising expectations. Societies, democracies particularly, tend to experience pain right after moments of reform because expectations go up. We want more of that. And then we don't get it like we did on November 5th. So what are we going to do? Right. So we have difficult days ahead. Professor Schlager mentioned 2025 and so on. It's going to be tough. I'm not here to mince any words about that. I'm not here to pin any gloss over that. This is going to be tough work for us to get through, both personally and interpersonally and socially in terms of activism and so on and so forth. We're going to need to really actually put our feet to the ground and walk with our words in terms of what we believe in. And the question becomes, what do we need to do that? How are we going to get through? What I offer is that we have to become people with democratic dispositions in order to make it through these next 4 years. And so let's start with some definitions. I always like to start with definitions when you introduce terms or when you go to study things. Let's talk about definitions. First of all, what is democracy? When I say democratic dispositions, what is democracy? Democracy is many things, but at least these 4 things. It is a way of being political, right? It is a form of politics, and politics is the art of living with strangers. So Aristotle, in political theory, Aristotle starts this tradition off with this definition by offering that the politics arises when you have people living together as strangers. It's beyond family, it's beyond tribe, it's beyond any kind of kinship community, and it is now you're living with strangers in the polis. Right? So it's a public, it's a different kind of arrangement. And it's built for difference. It's designed, particularly our democracy, is designed for difference, right? It's built to handle conflict. It's not built for unanimity. It's not built for agreement. It is built for conflict. That's something else that I think many people miss when they think about democracy. We're supposed to all kind of get along and agree and sort of and have kind of maybe a kind of a kumbaya feel. No, that's not what democracy is for. In a democracy, we will have opponents, people with whom we disagree and with whom we fight against what they're doing. Right? It's made for that. So the question becomes, how do we engage in what democracy asks of us in a way that's productive? And this means that it's more than procedures and power. Now, this is another conversation in political theory. There are folks who view democracy simply as a matter of procedures and rules and so forth, and that if you just arrange the rules correctly, you can produce a democracy. That is not most of the political theory tradition. It's not most of the democratic tradition. Most people view democracy as a culture, as a way of being in the world, right? Of which we might have norms or things like that. But it is about a certain kind of person who and people who decide to come together and live together with their differences. And the way they do that is they agree to stay connected across difference. That is the agreement, starting from Hobbes on forward even, right? The social contract tradition is what I'm talking about here. This is the agreement. We agree we're going to come together and stay together. And so that is actually the work. The rules and procedures and voting and the mechanics and all that, institutions, all that is very important and we need those. But really what makes democracy work is a kind of moral formation. It allows people to stay together across difference over time. And we get to manifest something that various people have called, or I'm using Ralph Ellison's language here, he calls it disinterested love. Right? Democracy requires a disinterested love. So we all have our local loves. We have our personal loves. We love our family. We love the people with whom we share the world and various things, and we love ourselves, hopefully. So we all have those kinds of loves. But in a democracy, we have something called disinterested love. It doesn't mean uninterested love. It doesn't mean that I am uninterested in whatever's happening. It doesn't mean indifference. It means disinterested means unbiased, right? Unprejudiced. That I have some detachment from the results of the functions of democracy. There is some way, and I'm gonna get to this later when it comes to the actual dispositions, that we're able to distance ourselves from the results of our democratic activities, right? We stay connected no matter what the results are. That's what it means to be disinterested. And Montesquieu before Ralph Ellison talks about this, the love of equality, right? We love equality so much that he calls it the virtue of the patriotic, that we're going to stay connected in our democracy no matter what, because equality is the virtue that we maintain. Again, it's a way of describing the ability to stay connected. And Francis de Sales, in a theological way, talks about this as God's love. That because God so loved the world, we so love the world. We love the world as God loves the world. Right? There's a kind of disinterested quality there. It doesn't matter who the people are, but we know that God loves everyone. And so we love those people the way God loves those people. Of course, this probably sounds familiar to anyone studying theology. So that is democracy. And so let's talk about dispositions. What are dispositions? Dispositions, I prefer this word because it has a kind of, it stands a middle ground of sorts, but these are habits of mind and heart. So let's talk about habits for a second. Most of who we are is outside of our awareness and outside of our control. Right? We are creatures of habit. Not only does neuroscience tell us this, Aquinas hinted at this a little bit early on, talking about how people, develop moral virtues and so on and so forth. A lot of it has to do with cultivation of habit. Of course, he was reading Aristotle, and Aristotle's big thing is, again, about habit. You want to become whoever you want to become, you have to practice it. You have to practice the habits of the kind of person you want to become. So what we have with dispositions are habits of mind and heart. So human beings are this middle ground between being completely controlled by stimulus and completely sort of, hate to use the word animalistic, but completely controlled by impulse, right? And completely rational. Nor are we completely rational creatures where we kind of wake up and decide, this is who I want to be. This is what I want to do in the world. This is how I want my heart to be today. This is how I want my body to feel today. This is exactly when I want my hunger to come and strike today so that I know it's time to eat. We don't have that kind of control. We don't have that kind of control. Human beings are not those kind of creatures. We exist in this middle ground where we have some agency, some control over who we are and what we do. We seem to exhibit some of that because we have self-awareness. We're aware that, oh, this I liked what I did and this I don't. So there's some element there. And awareness brings choice. But at the same time, we're not rational creatures where we completely decide ourselves, nor are we completely beholden to every single impulse or drive or stimulus that comes along. Right? We do have some agency and some ability to choose. So with that capacity, the aim is to develop habits. In order to develop habits, we need something called discipline. And it's from the Latin discere, which is typically translated as to learn today, translated as to learn. But learning in the classical sense, when the word was crafted in the classical sense, is not the same as it is today. It is not a matter of simply opening up a book and memorizing whatever's in there, and then maybe repeating it somehow on some exam or some test or whatever, and therefore we know what it is. That is a kind of intellectualizing learning. It's kind of a post-enlightenment learning. It has to do a little, again, too much with cognition. That's not how learning was conceived of originally. It happened through habituation. You do the same thing over and over and over again. You create yourself. And it looked like learning by rote in the classical tradition. But the point was you learn with your whole being, right? Not just our reason. And so today, being creatures of modernity and post-modernity, we like to emphasize our reason quite a bit. And it's not always bad to do that. But honestly, discipline is about engaging with something in a way that we learn with our whole body, right? We habituate ourselves to it. So when it comes to democracy, and I've written about this separately, and it's on Quare actually, in the election offering there, we have to have a discipline of democracy, right? Because discipline is about connecting to something, staying connected to something, learning something so much that it infuses who we are and we become creatures of that kind. So a good education is supposed to do that. It's supposed to help us create ourselves through the tradition, through the works, through all the examples that we read of and encounter, and so on and so forth. And so when it comes to democracy, the idea is to develop practices and ways of habituating ourselves that allow us to become democratic citizens. So this is why we use the words democratic dispositions. What are the habits of mind and heart that allow us to engage in democracy in a way, particularly in this moment, that is so difficult and so challenging? Now, I'm going to name just 3 habits because I think we're coming up, well, it should be coming up on time shortly, but I'm going to name just 3 habits. And what I invite you to do, those here and maybe also watching from the future, to do is to consider other habits, right? Other dispositions that you might consider as democratic. So I'm going to name 3 here. The first is openness. And by openness, you could call it many other things, but by openness, what I mean is a sense of detachment. This is what I was mentioning earlier, a sense of possibility. And one way to describe this is non-judgment, although that really is misleading because human beings judge. This is what human brains do. They judge the world, they evaluate things, and we always have judgments. The key, or what words like non-judgment mean, is to be aware of our judgments so that we can see that's a judgment that I'm making. That's not the actual reality that I'm encountering. It's a judgment about that reality. So think of it in terms of memory. If you think of a memory right now, you have the memory, and then you have the response to the memory, what it conjures up for us. And that little bit of space between the memory and our reaction to it, our response to it, that's what gets called non-judgment, or we can call it openness. The ability to have just a little bit of space between the person, let's get down to it here in terms of our democracy, the person we are speaking with and with whom we're speaking, and our judgment about that person, what we think and feel about that person. There's a little bit of space there. We just have to practice pausing and waiting and just giving it a second, just give it a beat, just give it a heartbeat, if you will. When you're encountering something that's stressful, pause for just a moment, just a breath, just to see what else is possible. So openness means openness to possibility. Another way to describe this is not condemnation, right? No condemnation of the person. I don't instantly jump to this person's bad, they're horrible, they're a terrible person, they voted for this way, they voted for the person I don't like, and so on and so forth. They're instantly bad. That's who they are. Instead of saying that's my reaction to this person and certain things about this person that I'm experiencing. Now, this doesn't mean on the other end of the spectrum, again, these aren't black and white things. We're talking about a range of behaviors here. We're talking about, again, disposition. We're talking about a mix of both impulse and agency. We're somewhere in the middle there. So on the other side of it is the feeling that, well, I just don't care. I'm indifferent to whatever it is I encounter out in the world. And I'm ethically indifferent. I have no moral feelings about anything that happened in the world. That's one way to solve this problem, right, of democracy, just not to care. Sometimes called apathy. First of all, that's probably physiologically impossible. But second of all, it's morally undesirable, right? We're not looking for indifference. We're going to care about things, and we're going to care very deeply. But we're not going to instantly condemn those with whom we disagree, our opponents. One way to also describe this is we think of the people with whom we disagree as opponents, but not enemies. Harkening back to Lincoln's words here, we must not be enemies, right? Opponents are still connected. They disagree. They're adversaries. They're in conflict. But enemies Inimicus means not friend. It means the connection's been broken. Now we're on a war footing. It sounds familiar to our culture today, but we don't want to be on a war footing. That's not the way out of this situation. That's not the way forward. So what we want to do is to be in a place where we don't condemn, but we're very passionate about what we believe in. We are engaging our opponent, but without condemnation and without indifference. Right? We care. Another way to put this is we care. And this takes practice and boundaries. So we do talk about safety, not trying to expose ourselves to things that are unsafe, but we just take practice. Second is curiosity. The second disposition is curiosity. I was recently over the summer in Kansas, and I was working with a group of UCC pastors who were on retreat, and I was there to talk about religion and politics. And I was doing my presentation, not this presentation, but another one, about politics and so on and so forth. It actually comes from my work with Common Ground Dialogue. It's part of our methodology that I teach and I practice there. And very early on, in the 6 hours that I had with them, someone about 20 minutes in, someone stopped me, a pastor actually, stopped me and said, yeah, but what happens when somebody says something crazy, right? What happens when somebody says something like, something ridiculous and it's conspiratorial and it doesn't make any sense and it's offensive and it's hurtful and all of that, right? What happens? And I was trying to hold off a little bit before getting to that. I was trying to set things up in a way. But the person kept insisting, tell me what I'm supposed to say to this person. They were obviously very, very angry about it. And the words I came back with were, okay, this is what you say to the person who's upsetting you. Tell me more. Tell me more. So students I work with in the pastoral care courses that I teach, probably heard me say this before, which is whenever you're doing caregiving, right? And particularly if you're doing caregiving with populations who are experiencing trauma and maybe have mental health issues and so on and so forth, you're not there to work with the mental health issues. You're not there to do all that kind of work, but you are there to provide care, spiritual, perhaps religious care. And so that means not tracking the ideas or the words that someone's saying, but listening for feelings. You're listening for feelings. You're not tracking the words. Try not to spiral into the conspiracy or this or that word or that argument or this or that statement or whatever it is, or that offensive thing. You can name the feelings, of course, that you have. You can protect yourself always, but it is not about engaging the arguments. We're not going to win going forward politically in our activism by argument. We're not going to out-argue anybody. I think that one of the revelations that came out of this election is that arguments don't matter. And not that I'm sorry, they don't matter. They do matter, but they're not going to matter right now. They're not going to matter for a while. We have plenty of arguments out there in the media. Arguments, counter arguments, all that stuff is flying around. And so it's not about information. It's not about low information, so to speak. And I know there's a lot of tactical analysis post-election from various people, pundits, and so on, thinking about what went wrong and from the Democratic side, and then what went right from the Republican side, and engaging in all that kind of work, and which argument won and which argument didn't, and how could we have done this better? That's all fine and good, but that is not the moment we're in. That's not the revelation that we've just experienced, and I would argue that's not something we need to focus on for the near future. And the next election comes around, we can get back to tactics. Right now, my argument is we need to do the hard work, develop these dispositions going forward. If we're going to restore and rebuild a democracy, if we even save it from who knows what might happen in the next few years. So it's not about logic. It's not about pursuing arguments. It's not about developing tactics to win over the other, win the day and all this. This is not that kind of, we're not in that kind of moment. It's about tracking the feelings. So clearly that on the other side yes, the usual suspects are there. Racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, all the other phobias, all that is there and all that is present, conceding all that. And there are clearly a significant number of people who felt not heard, to the point where they probably voted for someone who was evidentially not qualified for the job, but somehow met an emotional need. Sometimes this gets put as the folks who voted for Trump were rebelling against the Democrats, against the elites, against condescension. And so class is part of the revelation that we experienced on November 5th. So we need to hear these feelings. And the only way we're going to hear this is if we develop the disposition of curiosity. We're not tracking the arguments, we're listening for the feelings. Feelings of being hurt, of being disrespected, of being left out, of being condescended to. This is particularly important for those who are at PSR, dealing with those who do not have the privilege to be here at PSR. Students who engage in the education here at PSR have power. You have it on two levels. One, you have social status. One, social status. And then two, you have moral power. You have to be very careful not to transmit feelings of condescension or inferiority to those who do not have that status and that power. So lastly, I'm going to come to the end here in just a moment. The last disposition I offer is that of having faith, confidence, letting go of control. Related to all these virtues, if you will, all these dispositions are related, of course, they're interrelated, but specifically naming the fact that if we claim to be spiritual people, if we claim to be religious people, we are familiar with things like faith. Another word for that is trust. Trusting Augustine's original insight that the world is good, that it is God's world, and we get to participate in it and participate in God's will for the world. And we don't do that, though, by directing whatever we perceive that will to be. We let go of the need to control the outcome of the work that we do in the world. Who we are and the work we do in the world is not dependent on the success we experience from what we do. Right? Have to trust that whatever we do is in our best efforts to be in faith with God's will in the world. So I don't have time necessarily to play this song, but Leonard Cohen's Alleluia comes to mind. It's about 4.5 minutes. But there's a last stanza here, the last few lines read as such, right? I did my best and it wasn't much. I couldn't feel, so I tried to touch. I've told the truth, and I didn't come to fool you. And even though it all went wrong, I'll stand before the Lord of Song with nothing on my tongue but hallelujah. That's faith. We could work as hard as we hope to work. We can work with all of our might, all of our energy. And as we did on November 5th, many of us, we're going to fail miserably. We will not always win. And yet, get up the next day, or the next couple of days, and you do it again. You get back at it. I was asked by a student after one of the pastoral care classes, who very, very earnestly, very eagerly, well, how in the world, are we going to do this? And this was actually prior to the election. Boy, if we lose this, I don't think, how are we going to, keep going? Why don't we just fight? Why don't we just get angry? Why don't we just go to war or whatever? Why don't we just struggle and so on and so forth? I said, well, that's not how Martin Luther King did it. That's not how Fannie Lou Hamer did it. That's not how Howard Thurman did it. That's not how Abraham Joshua Heschel did it. That's not how any of the people we revere now did it. And they didn't have any more knowledge about the future than we do. But how did they do it? They sang hallelujah. They got up and they did it again, knowing that they were likely not going to win. So we can do this, folks. If we claim to be spiritual and religious, or religious, we already know what faith is. We already know what it means to trust. We already know what it means to be open. And we already know words like vulnerability. We already know what it means to live a life of faith. The difference now is that that life can no longer afford to be personal and private. We can no longer afford to keep it to ourselves. We now have to do it in public. If we care at all, if we desire a better future full of justice and righteousness, we're going to have to do what we do in private, in our churches and in our congregations and in our pews and so on. Have to do all of that in public. Bring all those virtues that we develop in our faith practices, that we do in our more ensconced and more perhaps more insular worlds, bring it out into the public. We're going to have to engage our opponents. We're going to have to talk with people. We're going to have to listen to things that we don't want to hear necessarily, with which we disagree, of course. And we can say that. It depends how we say that. So others came before us. Other people did this work. Again, I named earlier what the difference might be for us. Our expectations are so high right now, which makes the pain so great. But just as they did for us, can we do it for the next generation? They set the standard. They created memories that we rely on. They wrote things, right? They gave talks. They gave sermons. They went and did protests, and they sat here and sat there and stood up here and stood up there. Can we do that for the next generation? When someone years from now looks back and goes, how in the heck did they do it? Can we say, this is how you do it? So I want to thank you all very much and wish you peace. And thank you for your time today. Look forward to having any conversation that we might be able to have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor McMahon. And the room is open now. Please put your questions in the chat, or better yet, if you feel comfortable, unmute and ask away. Yes, Grace, please.
Yeah, I'm willing to say it out loud, and it's like exciting and terrifying, as I follow along with what you say. My Buddhist heart is like right there with you. Bodhisattva bows, yes. That part about tell me more. When I am faced with that energy, and it's usually from the people I would say on my side of the apocalypse, disappointed, disheartened, but their fears and their vision of what went wrong and how it's going to be now. And that's the one that is hardest for me to not argue with. And not even argue like you're wrong. It's argue, will you please stop doing that? Will you please let it go? Will you? Oh, but yeah, so I just want to acknowledge that's where I know that I'm going to need to discern and practice and take little baby steps and how to best engage with that one.
Yeah, thank you. Can you clarify for a bit for me? The people who are so disappointed in the loss, are so hurt.
Yes, and I can hear the fear, but there is also, for me, what I would say is, with the fear, is what do they call it? Catastrophizing. It's sort of like as a protection. Like, I am so hurt by what happened that now I have to say all the wrong, how terrible it's going to be. Is that?
Yeah, that would be the openness, right? That's a bit of detachment. Just step back for a moment. One of the things, I'm glad you asked the question, because one of the things that's very important is to develop a practice, particularly a contemplative practice of sorts. If you're a spiritual religious person, or a meditation practice, of course, there's many, many kinds. But what these practices have in common, or one of the effects they have in common, is the ability to help a person cultivate a witness self. Right? You probably recognize that language. And the ability to see oneself. I can track my thoughts. I can notice over time as I practice, this is what's happening to me right now. See, there's some ability to distance a bit. So this non-judgment, that's what it means to be non-judgmental, is to just have a little distance on my responses to the world. So, yeah.
Okay, the witness self helps because that gives me a space to hold. It's compassionate, but in a certain sense, it has a boundary to it because I don't want to be pulled into that, what feels to me like this downward spiral. I'll sit with that for a little while, but calling it a witness self, that's a disposition of witnessing, just presence and witnessing, that helps. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I'm having to fit this into a very rigid, like 55-minute time frame, but actually it's really helpful. You're talking about connection and maintaining connection with, and I'm speaking about with more, people who are very important, have always been very important in my life. And so, and I think to back away and to to have that distance, to have that, what you call the witnessing self, that's very helpful. In a more strictly political, what I'm noticing ever since this election is when I try to engage with people who are on the opposite side of my politics, sometimes they are doing nothing but just provoking. They are provoking. And that is the whole thing. I try to engage with people on environmental issues, and I present, the latest IHHS report, or, and they don't read it. They don't, and what they do is they just simply provoke. And so of course then I feel provoked, and so what do? I back away, I disengage, I stop, get off that platform. And it is through the computer. And prior to the election, I was trying to maintain we have to communicate with each other. We have to be able to agree to disagree. We have to maintain we have to maintain a communication. Now I'm, when it's like they're not doing their part. Or there was, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, please go ahead.
I mean, it's and sometimes I, for lack of a better word, can kind of flip out. I mean, there was something about a Republican politician called complaints against Pete Hegseth, sexual assault, evidence of almost certainly alcoholism. They called those complaints woke. It's like, wait a minute, objecting to that kind of stuff is woke? I don't think so. But anyway, do you have any suggestions? I mean,
absolutely. Well, one, you did one already. You're doing it well, which is, it seems if you know your boundaries, right? You know what's safe for you, what you can handle, what you can't. We all have nervous systems. We have bodies.
right.
They can take only so much. So that's part of self-awareness, and we have choice with that. But the other is they don't need to do their part for me to decide who I want to be in the world vis-a-vis this result in this election.
Yeah. So, I mean, sorry, I'm sorry, can you say that again?
You were mentioning that they're not doing their part. They're not doing the other part of it. Now, mine, up to the point where they completely disconnect and you have strife. I mean, actual, that's not, we don't want to even imagine that
Right.
war. But up until that point, I don't need to worry about their agreeing with me. So remember, this is not about agreement, it's about trust building. In a democracy, there'll be winners and losers. It's built for that. There are supposed to be winners and losers. The question is, do the winners trust the losers not to revolt against the results? And do the losers trust that they'll get another shot? The power has to continue to flow and rotate constantly. There is no stopping in a democracy. And however, though, you mentioned the various controversies in the news. I've got to the point where I suppose it's a result of even my work here at PSR, where I'm attuned to the pain that I witness in the headlines, various people. In my opinion, President-elect Trump is a person in so much pain, he will destroy the world rather than feel any of it.
I can agree with that.
And so let me just say two things. One, theologically, as a person of faith, particularly as a Christian, a progressive Christian, I cannot say that anyone is ineligible for God's grace, out of bounds, so to speak. Right? Now, they might be out of my capacity as a person to help them. They might be beyond my means, my skillful means, right? It might be too much for me to handle in various. So I get that. But everyone, again, this is Augustine, everyone is eligible for grace. And if I can see that, that's again, non-judgment. It's the ability to see that person's pain. So I can choose how I want to defend myself against it or how I want to respond to it. Right? I'm not just reacting.
Mm-hmm.
Let me pause there. Yeah, please, Kate. Oh, yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for this presentation, Dr. McMahon. Couple of things, riffing on what you were just sharing, I was thinking about the stages of faith. Are you familiar with James Fowler? This idea of, so I was thinking a lot about that these are really spiritual practices you're talking about, right? Cultivating. And if your faith is kind of stuck, or even your worldview is stuck in this kind of literal myth, it's going to be really hard to break out of that. And I appreciate what you were saying about we have to be cautious and not be condescending, right? And I think that part of, at least how I'm trying to develop in my faith, is having that capacity to hear people in their small worldview and not treat it like it's small, but say something like, tell me more. I think I heard a lot of echoes of nonviolent communication and what you were sharing too. And I think that's really helpful literature for all of this, for this moment, but also in our growth, as spiritual leaders. So, and I'll just say too, and I hope maybe to talk about this another time with you, but I've been thinking a lot about public schools as kind of like the last frontier of the democracy. And I'm so identified as a public school person. I grew up in public schools, and my friends teach in public schools. I've worked as a sub in public schools, and there are so few places where children are interacting with people that are very, very different from them, whether it's, from a religious perspective, economic perspective, political perspective. And when these schools keep closing in Chicago, they keep closing, we're losing something. So anyway, thanks for all the ideas you brought here.
Yeah, no, and thank you so much, Kate, for that. And if it's okay, Brent, we're okay on time. I'm okay, I was to say. Yeah, that's so very, very important, though, Kate, because the public, revitalizing the understanding of what the public is, right? And so these things were originally designed to be the venues where the citizen was created, and everyone went to public school, and supposed to come together and engage with each other and study the same things and kind of craft the same reality and work from there. Obviously, all that is not happening anymore. I mean, from the media to the inequality and the skyboxification. I would recommend Michael Sandel's work on meritocracy. Is really great on this. I think he coined the term skyboxification, which is simply the idea that people now, when you go to the sports venues, the wealthy now get to stay in the skyboxes. They never get wet. They never encounter the same world that we're encountering. Those of us who, myself, sit down in the regular seats. And so there's no contact. There's so much loss of contact amongst people today, happening virtually and in person. The pandemic didn't make that better at all, obviously. So, but public, the idea of what it means to be public, what is a public school? Yeah, I'm sorry to hear about the schools closing in Chicago. It's a tragic loss. Yeah, please, Bernie.
I'm relaying something, someone who has been watching on Facebook. The name is Derek. Thank you for your comments about elitism. In my progressive Christian congregation, we really struggle with how to engage in conversations with those who think differently than us. Because I know where I live in Ohio, our congregation is seen as being elite, and we struggle to dialogue with others. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Derek, for that.
Yeah, well, thank you, Derek. Thank you very much. Yeah, prayers for you and your congregation. It is quite the struggle. I will say, again, the reason for this work and the work I do at Common Ground Dialogue, the work I do at PSR, it might seem small, if you will. I mean, as I say, personal, right? It's kind of one-on-one, it's an engagement at that level. It might seem a little tedious even, but it really is the only way to rebuild, because the other avenues, as Kate was just mentioning, a lot of the other avenues are cut off, right? Engaging virtually with other people is so challenging today. Strangers, I mean, right? Strangers. It's so challenging today. There's no natural spaces out in the civic life and normal life that where we're going to come across each other. And so we have these silos, and church has been one of them for a long time, but these segregated spaces. So I'll just thank you for your observations, and again, prayers for you and your work, and glad, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Professor McMahon, for this workshop. Again, the fifth of 5, querying the 2024 vote with the Center for LGBTQ and Gender Studies. This is the last program of our calendar year 2024, and we'll resume programming come early February. So again, thanks, Professor McMahon. Thank you, everyone, for being here, either in the Zoom room or on Facebook. And we appreciate your presence and support. And happy holidays to everybody, and Happy New Year.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Peace. Peace be with you, and be well.